It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to Paratruth. What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Paratruth Reborn. This is a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. My name is Erik.
And I'm Justin.
And today we have with us William J. Hall discussing his book, The Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. Now, Bill is the author of the paranormal bestseller, World's Most Haunted House, which explores the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. The Bridgeport Poltergeist Photos and Archives book, as well as the Haunted House Diaries and Phantom Messages. Bill has extensive experience as a performing magician and is a seasoned researcher of the unexplained, delving into topics ranging from folklore and urban legends to fortune-telling, the pyramids, and other mysterious tales. His syndicated column, Magic and the Unknown, ran for 6 years in multiple newspapers and he has been interviewed worldwide and broke Discovery Channel records with his appearance on Devil's Road on the Travel Channel, among other programs. So without further ado, let's bring in Bill Hall.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us.
It's been a while, Bill.
It has.
Yeah, quite a while.
Well, now, Bill, I know that we've had you on the show a few times over the years, but if you can, just tell us how you started researching the paranormal again for our new listeners.
Well, it was always something as a child I researched, and I was more on the UFO end of things, sending away for government documents as a kid and things like that, and watching In Search of and those kinds of shows. But with Lindley Street, it really got me going down the rabbit hole and taking a much more active role. Because in the old days, I was a member of the Psychic Investigation Committee at Society of American Magicians, but mainly we just got people faking stuff. And so didn't get much, paranormal kind of things in that I guess to be expected. But and then with Lindley Street, that story just sparked I saw a Facebook post, and then I ended up Googling it, and after reading some of the newspaper articles about it, was convinced that maybe there was something there, and that got me going down the rabbit hole, and of the paranormal in general too.
Now, this book is kind of a pair book to The World's Most Haunted House. So what made you want to come out with this book to pair with that?
Well, over the years, people have asked me to release some of the transcripts, and they wanted to see the photos, and they wanted to see them in color. So, and then it was the 50th anniversary, and I said, well, let me see if I could do it. So I figured it was a fun project to do, and happy to say so far people like it.
Yeah, sure.
And I certainly did find it very interesting being able to see all the various photos and, of course, the written text of the recordings as well, at least some of the recordings. I found that really fascinating and a lot of fun to kind of delve into, made it feel a little more real, as if we were actually there investigating it ourselves. So that was really cool. And I do appreciate that for this book in particular. But for those who are not really familiar about the case, can you actually explain what had been happening there that's really rose this or grew this this interest in the investigation of it?
Well, this was very widely publicized and had a lot of witnesses to it. So in the newspaper reports, there was quotes from police officers, firefighters, reporters, friends, family, onlookers, priests, by the time this thing really blew open. So there was just so many witnesses involved, and it was such a public display, unlike we've really seen in, I don't know, 100 years. Maybe the Bell Witch can compare in some ways, but so that, that's really what piqued my interest, if that's what you were asking, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that really piqued my interest. Is it was huge, and of course I grew up in Bridgeport too, so
Okay.
I heard this story on the news when I was 10, and asked my dad about it, and he said, it's a bunch of baloney. So the hoax story, got him too.
Well, and at the time, there were a lot of people who actually believed it was a hoax, right? And there were even articles published claiming as such.
Well, the hoax story was released really by the police. Basically, they want to get the city back, and the only way to do that and to keep the family safe too was to claim it a hoax. Unfortunately, the little girl got the blame for it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, because they tried to burn the house down. You have to remember, so so things were getting out of hand. They had to block the street off. It was a very, very public event. So not only was the family dealing with the poltergeist antics inside the house, they had to deal with the very real human end of it, human monster.
Right.
Hmm.
Now, I had read in your book one thing that really just stuck out to me. There's plenty of things that stuck out to me, but this one in particular, I read that the activity seemed to quiet after the priest had blessed the home, only for the activity to restart again several hours later in a much worse state. Now, for me, I can't help but find this an odd coincidence that lines up with a Bible passage written in Matthew 12:43-45, which says, basically talks about a spirit leaving a house, then coming back with 7 more wicked spirits that cause greater chaos than the original. And so, despite having religious artifacts within the home, as the owners did, were the Goodins a religious family in general? And how did their beliefs relate or impact to the haunting itself and its outcome?
The Goodins were a religious family. They went to church every week. And Jerry was an overall good guy. He was a Boy Scout leader, even though he had no children of his own at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they were a very religious family. A little quirky in the upbringing of Marcy, but that's a different issue. As far as religious items, I mean, they were really just, if you look at the data, they were really disturbed less than about 10% or less of the time. But I think they're more memorable to people. If a chair floats or a chair flips, that's one thing. But if a cross does it, it tends to impact you more. are,
Right.
Depending on who you are, of course. But so I mean, I think that's why it was important for me to look at and separate the data itself, because we all have biases, and I probably would have thought the same thing. Oh, Jesus seemed to go after religious items, or and maybe it knew that would get the family's goat, so to speak. And certainly that could happen within the scope of everything else, but to say it went after religious items was not statistically true at all. It was exactly the opposite, you'd say. If anything, it went after chairs and TVs.
Now, you talked about that supposedly this was proven to be a hoax, then in turn was overturned with that. What type of activity were they saying was being hoaxed? And when you got to that part where you were able to investigate this a little bit, what were your thoughts on the different activity that they had going on there?
Well, I had the 30 hours of interviews that were done right at the time, right after it was announced a hoax. The police department was mandated to participate in this investigation and be interviewed by the investigators. So, and that's what really led me down the rabbit hole, is because that actually was mentioned briefly in a newspaper, and it mentioned the gentleman's name, Boyce Beatty. And I contacted Boyce, and he ended up giving me 22 cassette tapes and a 9-hour reel-to-reel tape from the Bridgeport Police Department interviews. So hearing those interviews is really what convinced me that Lindley Street was really what happened. You had multiple witnesses that saw the same things happen, and they were each interviewed separately. So it's one of the first times we had this kind of way to collaborate evidence. And that was really, really a high point from an investigator point of view, is to have this kind of 10 people saw it, and maybe one person didn't see it from the beginning, and one person saw it from the beginning, didn't see it in the end, and another one saw it from the end. But you put it all together, it's not like one person said it or there's two people who said it. You've got sometimes a room full of people that witnessed it.
Right.
And things such as Marcy being picked up and thrown across the room.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I mean, speaking of Marcy, there is evidence that suggests the poltergeist had revolved around her. Is that factual? And why do you think so many hauntings seem to revolve around children generally? Because I think that's pretty prominent, especially in poltergeist-like activity.
Yes, you're definitely correct. And poltergeist activity, and normally it's a girl over a boy, 2 to 1 of the cases we know of course. But in a poltergeist case, the focal point in this case, as in a classic poltergeist case, would be Marcy, the little girl. Had plenty of repressed feelings, being very shy and introverted and picked on in school. She was adopted after the parents, Laura and Jerry, had death of their son at age 6. And he was sick the whole time, basically. So they were smothering her parental wise. And then she got beat up at school, and she was stuck at home with the mother, who she didn't get along with because the smothering and everything. And after about 6 weeks of that, that's when the poltergeist activity really exploded. Before that, there was things that were going on, but it was milder. Well, there was the knockings on the inside and outsides of the walls. Those started 1971 to 1973. And it became really public in November of 1974. So just to give you an example, so there was some things going on, but not in the relation of poltergeist activity like what exploded after that period of trouble with Marcy, who was just about 10 at the time, going to be 10.
Right. I mean, as an investigator, thinking back to those early times where there were just like the rapping on the wall or the knocking, were just subtle things, only to have it explode later. Like, do you have any theories as to whether or not it was once? I mean, obviously, poltergeist could be multiple spirits, but do you have any theories as to whether or not there were more spirits that became involved later on as these incidents with Marcy started? Or do you think these spirits had always been there and just happened to build up on energy as things progressed in Marcy's life, especially with all the negative outcomes that were happening?
Well, I think it's, as my dear friend who recently passed, and one of the witnesses in Lindley Street, Paulino, had said, it's like ringing the dinner bell for these things. Personally, I think that the theory is, she's sending out these frequencies, and somehow it attracts these things, and they come through. And of course, how and who they are and that sort of thing. Then you get into a bunch of conjecture, but we don't know if they want to be here even. I try to look at it from every angle,
Right.
It seems like it's a negative relationship though between, the little girl and the item, but it did pick her up and throw across the room too. So, I mean, I know, at least on a conscious level, I don't believe she's involved.
Right.
Now, if I remember right, were the Warrens involved in this case?
Yes, they were called in. Mary Pasquarello, who was a member of one of those psychic committees down in New Haven. I forget the name of it, but she was nearby and called Ed and said, Ed, you got to get down here. There's a really bad poltergeist case. And he said, well, we're pretty busy. Is this like the real deal? I mean, this is, what do you mean? What's going on? She goes, well, there's, police cars and fire engines, and so he says, whoa, okay. So they go and get Father Charbonneau, and Paulino is on his way there. He was hoping to have dinner because Lorraine was legendarily a very good cook. But instead, they all headed over to Lindley Street, and the Goodins never heard of them, but let them in because no one else was able to help so far. So figured if they could be of help, why not give them a shot? And that's kind of how they got involved.
Mm-hmm. And once they got involved, I mean, did the activity increase even more now that there were people actually there witnessing things and kind of diving deeper into the subject matter?
Well, it's funny because usually in these cases, when you have so many people, it usually would die down. If you have a bunch of new people enter, it usually would die down before anything would pick up.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, during that period of intense activity, even with new people being introduced, the activity still continued. So that was an interesting part of it to show how heightened it was.
Right.
Now, originally it was believed that the house was sold. However, after further investigation, that was found to be false. Had the home eventually been sold, and do you know whether or not reports have been submitted regarding a continued haunting with the new owners?
I don't know of any, as far as I know, there hasn't been any activity before or after. As is not uncommon in a poltergeist case, although I guess you can say there's something to say about the land itself or whatever. There is an underground spring there, so that's interesting. If for nothing else, they say that could have something to do with it, but who, that's the missing ingredient. The $6 million question. But I suppose if you get, I think if you got the right family in there, the right people or the wrong people, I should say, then sure, maybe you can stir up something again, open something up.
All right. And that's true. It's very interesting that like running water, rivers, they tend to generate or supposedly generate energy to empower spirits in some way to help them manifest their abilities of moving things or just manifest themselves in a certain location. So it is very possible then, I suppose, these spirits were already there and just the good ends happened to have an energy that provoked them, these spirits, and allowed them to come forth. Whereas when someone else came in, they didn't share that same type of energy and kind of help subdue the natural forces that were. Because if I'm not mistaken, once they did move out of that house, there's no report that the poltergeist followed them, correct?
Right. When they were, they stayed they never left the home, but I mean, during the short periods of time where they left the home, no, it didn't follow them. It did, something followed Lorraine and Paul, but nothing followed when the Goodins were away from the house, as they sometime did. They'd spend a night here or there,
Right.
Try not to imposition people, or they would have Marcy stay over there and they would stay at the house, but when they were away, there was no reports of activity at where they were staying, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something you mentioned earlier was the fact that the parents were kind of smothering Marcy. Now, was that smothering as in there was some type of abuse, or just smothering because she was an adopted child, or what did you mean by that?
Yeah, there was no evidence of abuse. I actually did ask about that just to cover all the bases, but no, there was no evidence of abuse. But their young child that they had, a little boy, Jerry Jr., he had, I believe, cerebral palsy and Down syndrome. And he couldn't walk or talk as normal, and he was sick a lot. They had a brace so they can carry him.
Okay.
And so and then he died with a high fever at age 6, and they were devastated, and they ended up adopting Marcy, and they were really smothering as far as parental. She couldn't go anywhere alone. She'd have to be walked to the bus, walked here, walked there.
Gotcha.
And you're shy and introverted, and then you're going to be picked on top of it. And so,
Right.
yeah, so that was part of that whole dynamic. And, the mother had to be everywhere.
Right. I mean, and that would make sense, losing a child that you would end up smothering another child that you have, because you never know what could happen. If they didn't expect their son to pass away, then they're worried about their daughter as well. But it does, it really does seem likely then that there were not only Marcy's emotions involved with this case and the energy of the poltergeist, but also we're talking about possible depression or anxiety with the parents who would smother her, who are worried about her constantly. So we have this big melting pot within this house that just kind of stirred up everything once Marcy came in to the home. And I just find that really, I find that really intriguing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would say the mother would be the other part of that real explosive energy.
Mhm.
The father, granted, I'm not saying, probably his anxiety, I'm sure could have contributed, sure. But he was more, I think, level set and, real nice guy. But I think more Laura and Marcy, their relationship, that was like, flint and steel. So that was definitely a catalyst to a lot of negative energy.
Now, was there ever any suspicion that the spirit or one of the spirits that were at this house was maybe the boy, and it was kind of acting out because they quote unquote kind of replaced him with Marcy, because they didn't have any activity before Marcy, right?
In let's see, 1971. That's right. Not before Marcy.
Okay. So did they ever suspect that the little boy might be one of the spirits involved?
I mean, that came up. The parents at one time said it. Not that they necessarily believed it, but they were at their wits' end, and it came out. And I don't think that's what it was. I think it was more of a classic poltergeist case.
Okay.
I think the role of the boy was simply that created that environment of the smothering, which led to the being picked on, which led to, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
So now, when it comes to actually investigating, what type of tools were being used at the time, and did they actually capture any significant evidence of the poltergeist itself, such as videos or photos or even EVPs of these spirits either speaking or acting in some way?
There was originally video cameras brought in, but then the parents nixed the idea. It was getting too crazy. There's too many people, and so they kicked him out. The newspaper. I mean, there was a reporter had a camera on him, and he saw dishes fly across, and as he told me, he said, "Well, camera or not," and he says, "How could I? I couldn't get to it in time." And he said, "And even if I got to it in time, and I expected it, which I wouldn't have, but even if I can get to it in time, took a picture of it, still what is it proof? So there's that. But there were on the audio tapes that did capture a noise that occurred before the phenomena happened. So that was captured on tape when an interview was being done inside the home. So that was pretty cool. But aside from that, they didn't use any real, equipment to speak of.
Okay.
Other than comforting the family and
Sure.
the Warrens' advice was if the activity gets heavy in one room, everybody get up and move and go to another room,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll settle it down.
Sure.
Which was good. But they didn't have any fancy tools other than trying to get an exorcism on the house, which I don't think would have been of any use. But in any event, that was thinking at the time.
Okay. And do we know exactly what that sound was that they did capture prior to the actual events of the haunting?
They never could figure it out. They had the police involved. They had the fire department. They had the city engineers. They ruled out construction. They ruled out anything having to do with the house settling, or
Mm-hmm.
they really couldn't. They didn't know where the knockings were coming from. They were on the inside and outside of the house, and they followed them room to room. Jerry thought maybe it was a neighbor because they owned a motorcycle, 74, I guess. But, so they just really didn't know. I mean, he even took pipes apart in the house thinking there was an animal in there or something. They didn't know. And then they recorded it with the police officer, a neighbor, a friend of theirs who lived across the street. And they recorded the sounds, and they never really were able to identify what they were.
Okay.
They didn't cause any damage. There was no damage done to the house, but they were really, really banging, very loud.
So, I mean, if they suspected animals and even suspected a motorcycle, then it's arguably okay to theorize that they probably sort of growling like noise on these voice recorders, then most likely, potentially.
Well, on the audio tapes I have, there was nothing else captured because they didn't do all the interviews in the home too. Mm-hmm. And depending on when it was done, the activity was a little bit sparse. It was starting to whittle down after Marcy got transferred and went back to school.
Okay.
Then she was happy, and it petered out after that. So
now, some of the pictures that you had in here were of the TVs that they had there. Apparently, most of their TVs were broken. Somebody had donated one to them, and one of them even fell on Marcy's foot, or almost fell on Marcy's foot. Were the broken TVs a part of this activity that was going on, or was it just they didn't have money to fix the TVs?
It was the activity going on. The TV in the kitchen came down slowly and then went fast, and it landed on Laura's toe.
Well, Laura's toe, okay.
Yeah, broke her toe, and she went to the hospital for it. And the other TVs floating, coming down, sometimes slowly. They had a lot of TVs for for a family in the 70s, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But even still, could you imagine going to your neighbor, because that's what they did. They went to their neighbor, Tom Lashley, and could you imagine saying, hey, do you mind if we borrow one of your TV? You heard about the poltergeist, and all our TVs are eaten up by the ghosts. You want yours to join it? Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about these TVs too, because for those of our listeners, we're not talking about obviously TVs that we have in 2025 that are light and often flimsy and easily tip over. I mean, in the 70s, TVs were big, they were heavy, and they were pretty darn stable. So to have a TV tip over slowly and then be pushed quickly would it make sense for it to naturally do that unless the legs gave out on it? Now, I know I had a TV from the 70s for a long time, and that thing was, I mean, it could have basically been a dresser, if nothing else. It was huge, huge and heavy. It took easily 2 people to lift that thing up the stairs. Whereas today, 25 pounds, maybe 30 tops for many of our big giant 70-inch TVs and whatnot. So I do find that very interesting in the fact that these particular TVs would just tip over. And even if one were to try hoaxing such a thing, it would take a lot of force to actually pull those things over if you're using some sort of invisible wire or anything like that. And I think you would agree, being a magician yourself and understanding how that all works. So as you were like kind of studying the investigations and doing your own investigation, like how did your skill as a magician kind of like help you to determine? Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know. Speaking in tongues. How did your skill as a magician help you to determine that this was particularly a real haunting that was causing this type of mischief rather than some sort of fake?
Yeah, I had to look at the totality of the evidence, what we're looking at. And some of the things that stood out was there was multiple things happening in all of the rooms at once, with witnesses in each room. And, when you look at the combination of those things and what was happening, like, sure, I can make a refrigerator float, but in the conditions that they were having this refrigerator float, that would be very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And especially nothing anyone would be able to pull off, not to put the good ones down, but I mean, he wouldn't be able to figure out how to do that.
Right.
And, a picture flying off the wall, yeah, that's not too impressive in itself. So you have to look at the totality of what's happening, and after hearing from all the people who were there, and there was so many, I think about 68 or so firsthand witnesses, and plenty secondhand. You get into that, but when you listen to what the witnesses are saying, and that I think is what really separates it. The other thing that magic helps with is people are going to tell you what they experienced, which is not necessarily what they saw. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important. And Boyce Beatty did a very, very good job during these interviews of not asking, oh, so the table flipped over. Yes. And that's it. Writes down table flipped over. No, he really went into it and said, well, wait, when you say the table flipped, what exactly happened? You're staring there, the table's there. Now what's next? And did it fly up fast? Did it fly up slow? Did it fall within the regular speed you'd expect it to fall, or did it fall slower or faster than normal? He really went into detail, and that's what's important, because otherwise people are going to tell you, what they saw, which is an interpretation. It's not going to give you the detail you need to really know what happened.
Right.
So those are, I think, the two main things that it's helped me with in looking at this case or anything.
Okay. Now, was Marcy always in the room when this activity was happening, or did it happen while she wasn't in the room?
That's a great question, because I crunched the data on that too, and more than half the time she wasn't even there.
Okay.
So, and even when she was, sometimes she was there and she was actually the center of it.
Mhm.
Her floating up in a chair, being thrown across the room, or having a chair flip with her in it. But no, that's a great question, and that's a question I had. So I went through the incidents as they were all recorded, and yeah, I forget the exact percentage, but definitely she wasn't there for quite a lot of them.
Okay.
And I would imagine that at some point, when she was in the room anyway, there's probably some speculation at the time that she had some sort of telekinetic powers and capable of moving these things. Because if I'm not mistaken, right around the 70s and a little earlier, there was some belief that people did have that power. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you also wrote in the book that of all of your studies, there is no one who's proven to be telekinetic and able to levitate things legitimately with their mind or other source outside of, um, faking it, using various devices to help create the illusion. So was that something that you found in the research that was discussed, that perhaps this wasn't spirits at all, but some sort of power that she had at one point?
Well, yeah, I mean, Bill Roll, his theory is that sometimes it's simply the psychokinesis, other times it's psychokinesis plus entities.
Hmm.
I never, I don't think I'd buy into the psychokinesis part itself, but it could just be another way of sending out the negative frequencies that attracts these things.
Hmm.
You know, so maybe it's really not. Maybe it's just the use of a different word, but I would call it frequency versus telekinesis, simply because that's just such an evil. It's a beautiful word in magic because I love the facts, but in reality, it's just an evil word. But I prefer frequencies. But.
Okay.
Okay. Now, why is this case still so prominent today? And if anything, what can we learn from it about hauntings going forward?
I think we can learn no matter how many witnesses you have.
Never enough. Yep. Got
It doesn't matter. Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the public part of the case that makes this, because there are poltergeist cases, and they're all fascinating, and they all have their things to them. But the public part of this case makes it truly that intertwined with everything. It really, to me, you think it's a case that really should have brought this into mainstream science. How many witnesses do you need? How many people do you need? How many crowds of people? How many? What do you need? And I wonder if they did keep the video there, if people would have just assumed that was faked. I mean, even in the 70s,
right.
Well, they did them. What was them was in the 50s or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But also, you have at least 60 some odd eyewitnesses. You have various reports from not only the individuals, the investigators, but even police reports that are coming in saying these things had happened. So what do you say to those people who are, for some reason, still skeptics, despite the growing evidence to support the actual legitimate hauntings?
I mean, I usually would tell them to read my book, but and if that doesn't do it, I mean, to me, that's better proof than being there.
Right.
Well, not if I had a lot of other people with me, but I mean, if you witness something yourself, sometimes you're double guess yourself, was I hallucinating, or, what was that, unless it's persistent, of course.
Right.
But in a case like this, it's almost better than that, because I had that confirmation over and over and over and over in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if these stories were falsified, you would start to see varying differences to each interview, and yet they all seem to line up pretty accurately. So such a thing is just, it's very rare, to create some sort of some falsity towards this, is making it a fake poltergeist or whatever, when you have that many people. And it's even harder to deceive that many people when they're all in this little room, this little house, because this house is not very big at all. It's a very tiny house. But to have that many people in this house and witness these things, surely somebody would have noticed something awry, right? Somebody would have noticed, oh, this is a wire over here, or this is being faked there. But that didn't happen. Instead, these were all very legitimate events that people had seen, they witnessed, and it drove them to learn more about it and see what they could do to help.
Yeah, and they were, the police did an amazing job. I mean, when they saw the TV float and come down and turn and stuff, they went over and saw the dust on top and knew that it couldn't have been dragged by a string or something, because it would have scraped the dust, and it didn't. It just turned right where it was. So they were very, they noticed those little details. Same thing with the refrigerator floating. I mean, they went to the basement, they looked on the ceiling, they tilted the fridge, they looked at it. They didn't just run away screaming.
Right.
So they did a very good job, I would say, in respect to just trying to figure out what was causing these things. Especially in those times, the first thing that they would think of would not necessarily be the paranormal, although The Exorcist did come out before then. So, that was on people's minds. But
right.
Now, Bill, coming out with both these books, The World's Most Haunted House and The Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street, the 50th anniversary investigator companion, what is your hope for people to take away from these books?
Well, I think it's if you want proof of the paranormal, these would be the books I'd recommend. Basically, and it's a heck of a poltergeist case too.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the poltergeist case itself is incredible, but then when you get the actual story of the public part of it, and it's rare that we have this much preserved so well. It's like the Bell Witch case, but a lot of that's lost in antiquity, and it's like the Roswell haunted houses,
which is pretty rare in and of itself.
Yeah,
right.
But what I find really interesting too, though, about this haunting is, as you said, it was very prominent within media, and there was even a point in which there were anywhere from 1,000 even up to 10,000 individuals in a crowd who are surrounding this house, trying to see something or learn something new. So this wasn't like a small little tucked away haunting that nobody knew about at the time. This is something that was huge and very widespread in knowledge about. And so you had a lot of people coming to see things. And it's very possible, despite the 60 some odd witnesses, there might have been a whole lot more out in the crowd who had seen things through the windows, who hadn't come forward and shared what the events were that they saw.
Yes, that's true. I know for a fact there's one or two, at least a few people that I've spoken to, and that I think are sprinkled in the book somewhere, that saw the swan move. outside in the house, those two decorative swans move like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are some police officers that, like one had reported guttural sounds being heard, but I don't have a police report on him. There's no report.
Sure.
It's just,
Yeah, word of mouth.
Yeah, it would be, I'm sure there are even more, definitely.
Yeah.
And, and I come across that. When I say secondhand, it's like, oh, I dated the chief's daughter, and I heard at the dining room table, blah, blah, blah. And then you have someone else, and when you start having multiple people say the same things, you start getting some more insight into it.
Right.
So it never ends.
Yeah. Well, then on top of that, like you mentioned the swans, but there's also eyewitnesses who claim, or at least the family who claim, that the family cat had actually spoken a couple of times during the haunting as well, like verbally spoke words, which to me is mind blowing, because that would be horrifying, I think, to have your cat talking to you, saying things like, what was the one was Jingle Bells, if I'm not mistaken, said it or sang it or something. That's wild to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the cat actually talked.
Sure.
I do think there was audio phenomena, and Jingle Bells was one of the things heard after Marcy hit her head, after she was flown across the room and, hit her head. Help was heard, and in the direction of the kitten. So I think you get the proximity effect. I think Jerry would say that the cat would come up the stairs and make these horrible sounds and say, "Go away, you dirty Frenchman," and things like that.
Sounds like something a cat would say.
Yeah, so we're not sure. We're not sure about that part of it. But I don't think the cat talked. But I do know that ABC and NBC and the major, they all had microphones there saying, "Hey, cat, we heard you could talk."
All right, Bill. Well, it is that time for us to let you go. So I want to give the mic to you to tell everybody where they can find you, find the book. It's all you.
Oh, okay. Right. If you go to Hall, HALL, of the paranormal.com, that's Hall of the paranormal.com, and search in the book section, you can get any of my books. I'd be happy to sign them and send them out for you with some free stuff, whatever I find around the house, $20 bill. Piece of fuzz or no, I'm only. But yes, and there's some paranormal stuff, and it all helps towards rent.
Yeah.
Now wait a minute, I'm supposed to have a good cause.
I feel living is a good cause.
That's all I came up with on the fly. No, but thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out for us to have you on about this book, because it's fascinating to read through it and see the different pictures and stuff. So hold on 1 second. I'm going to put you into limbo as we close out, and then we'll let you know where you can get the link and all that stuff for when this comes out. All right. All right, folks. The book is The Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street by Bill Hall. There you go, right there, if you guys can see it. If not, just Google it. You'll find it if you're listening to the audio. Next week, we're going to be bringing on Tim Sedano from Paranormal Insights. If you are part of the UPRN network and listen to us religiously, you'll know who that is. And we're going to be doing a two-parter with him starting on our show, and then we'll flip over to his show. So definitely stay tuned for that. Anything else you can think of before we head out?
No, not at the moment. We've been keeping up with things really good. So there's no house cleaning for weeks now. That's right. A good thing.
I mean, I've gotten our schedule to the point where we even have an Easter episode to talk about in a few weeks.
Incredible.
So make sure you're continuing to tune in. We're going to be having guests, some new and different topics and just exploring the paranormal in different ways. But until next week, folks, where you will find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.